Island of Freaks. Is everyone ready? Dad asked. Yeah, my mother replied, while I just kept silent. Okay, Dad added. We went down the stairs, left the entrance, and got into the car. My parents were in high spirits, but I didn't feel it at all. I didn't want to go. After all, it was already past 3 o'clock, and by the time we got there it would be 5. Why go somewhere in the evening? Tom, why are you so sad? I just don't want to go. Really, when I was your age, I dreamed of trips like this. Rivers, tents, baked potatoes, and telling stories by the fire. And here you are, sitting at the computer all summer, not seeing the light of day. What will you tell your friends at school? How the monsters were defeated in video games? Well, Dad, am I wrong? Stop arguing, my mother interrupted as my father stopped swearing. The car stopped as close to the beach as it could. Beyond that, the road was impassable. We went down a steep slope to the water, where a boat was already waiting for us. A middle-aged man led us aboard and drove us away from the shore. The journey to the island took about 20 minutes. When we arrived, my parents immediately set up the tent and started a fire. I wanted to explore the unfamiliar area, but Dad made me help out, so I had to postpone my walk. Closer to 7 o'clock, we sat down to eat. It didn't seem so bad, and I even started to enjoy it, though at first, I didn't want to come at all. After a hearty dinner, I stripped off my clothes and ran straight into the water. Mom and Dad decided to stay on the shore. Swimming quickly became boring, so I decided to explore the island. The further I went into the depths of the island, the more curious I became. I was eager to find something interesting, but all I found were cigarette butts, plastic bottles, and disposable utensils. This place is covered in trash. What a beautiful spot, ruined by jerks, I grumbled, indignant under my breath, and did not notice how deep I was in my thoughts. Distracted, I didn't immediately notice how far I had wandered. The unfamiliar surroundings caused a slight twinge of fear, so I called out for my parents, but there was no response. I must have gone too far, I thought. Well, no problem, I'll just head back. But as soon as I turned around, I heard leaves rustling behind me, just like in a horror movie. I spun around and saw no one. It must have been a bird jumping from branch to branch, I reassured myself. At first, I walked slowly, enjoying the calm of nature and the warm July evening. There was no fear, just a sense of wonder. I didn't want to overthink it, much less panic. Best to enjoy the opportunity to explore the island in such beautiful weather. Over time, however, anxiety began to creep in. I realized I had been walking for quite a while. My legs started aching from the long walk, and it was already getting dark. How much time did I spend walking? I checked my phone and saw that it was nearly 10 o'clock. It was strange that my parents hadn't called. It felt like I had gone the wrong way. At first there were signs of people, footprints, bits of trash. But now, not even scraps of paper were visible. Maybe the trash was hidden by the approaching darkness. Or maybe I had wandered into a place where people didn't go because of the dense trees and bushes. It seemed that the nature around was untouched, as if no one had ever appeared here. Unpleasant doubts started gnawing at me. It was dark, my parents weren't calling, and I couldn't find my way back. After mulling it over, I finally dialed my mother's number. The phone rang, and I waited, but there was no answer. When I tried calling Dad, it was the same story. I had to head back right away. Most likely my parents were drinking and left their phones in the tent, but I'd rather be with them than wandering alone in the dark woods. The only idea that came to mind was to push through the dense bushes and thickets to get back to the shore. It took me a long time, about half an hour to get through. Considering it was dark, I was getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. My legs were aching from fatigue, and I couldn't find my parents. It felt like an eternity. When the lights of the camp began to be seen in the distance, I forgot about the pain in my legs and ran as fast as I could. I didn't even think about how, at 14 years old, I could still be so afraid of the dark like a little kid. "Mom, Dad, do you know where I've been?" I yelled, not even close to them yet. But there was no answer, just silence. Maybe they drank too much and fell asleep while I was gone. But as I got closer, I froze in shock. Oh God, no! No, my mother was lying on the sand. One arm was stretched out, the other along her body. Her legs were sprawled in different directions. I desperately hoped they had just had too much to drink, so I decided to roll her over. But what I saw made me scream in terror. Her face was buried in the sand, her mouth and eyes wide open, staring at nothing. A thin trickle of saliva dripped from her mouth, and there were deep, dark grooves visible around her neck. I immediately put my hand to her neck, then to her chest. I even held my phone screen near her nose to check for breathing, but it was no use. Mom was died. Dad was sitting in a camping chair, which seemed normal, except for one thing. His head was tilted unnaturally far back. I carefully tried to lift his head and checked his pulse, but there was no pulse. The head seemed to just hang on the veins and skin, and the spine was clearly broken. Realizing what had happened, I collapsed onto the sand near my dead parents, sobbing uncontrollably and occasionally screaming in sheer horror. Who could have done this? As the thought crossed my mind, I froze. Whoever did this was still here, on the island with me. It was unlikely they were finished and had sailed away. Suddenly, I heard a faint rustling behind me. It silenced my sobs, and I listened closely. Surprisingly, there was no fear, only despair. So when a long, thin man with a disproportionately large, bald head emerged from the shadows of the trees, I wasn't scared. I just sat there, stupidly staring at him. "Are you brave?" the figure said, tilting his head slightly. "Go to hell! You'll die for this! I'll make sure you rot in prison, you hear me?" I shouted at the top of my lungs. He only smiled with his toothless mouth, and in the darkness, it looked like he didn't even have a mouth, just a black hole. For some reason, that was the moment I felt truly afraid. I scrambled to my feet and backed away. "Scared now?" he asked. "I already called the police, they'll be here any minute," I bluffed. There was no police, but I had to say something. He approached me without any caution, snatched the phone from my hands, and easily broke it into two parts. I tried to move away, but it was too late. Despite being skinny, he threw me to the ground with ease, and grabbing my leg, began to drag me deeper into the island. I slammed my face into branches and rocks along the way. I had to shield myself with my hands to avoid getting a stick in my eye or swallowing bits of dirt and stones. When the ghoul finally stopped, he forcefully flung my leg to the ground. He could have just let go, but no. This creature wanted me to suffer until the very end. "Who did you bring here?" came a raspy old voice. I turned to my side and could see the owner of this terrible voice. In front of me stood a woman, no older than 50 by appearance, but judging by her trembling voice, she could have been 90. "A boy," the man responded. "I can see it's not an old one. Where are the other two?" she asked, glancing at the figure beside me. "They're lying back there, dead of course. Only this one is still alive," he replied, nodding in my direction. If they weren't talking about me and my parents, I might have thought this was a conversation between two lunatics. My heart was racing. "Why is this one still alive?" she asked sharply, narrowing her eyes at me. "Too brave. The brave need to be punished." The woman turned a smile to his remark and rolled her eyes. It was already scary to look at her, and with such a grimace she could pass for some kind of monster. She didn't have black holes instead of eyes or mouth to ears. She was just very thin with a big head like my captor. And on the head was long, unwashed hair. I thought about what he said, punishment, and realized it was my chance to make a move. These idiots were too engrossed in their conversation to notice me, and they seemed to have already forgotten I was even there. I jumped sharply to my feet and turned around, but fell from a sharp pain in my stomach. Another grotesque figure, just like the others, stood behind me. He must have been guarding me, which is why he reacted so quickly to my escape attempt. "Get up!" he barked, then landed a heavy blow to my lower back. "Why?" the old woman interjected, her voice cutting through the air. "Parents," he grunted in response. "So what? Leave this one here. You go bring them here. You're not the only one around." The woman snapped, clearly irritated. "Ugh, fine. What are you looking at? Let's go. We'll bring the dead ones here," he ordered, but not to me, to the one who had dragged me to this place. Before they left, they tied me tightly to a tree, so tight that I almost immediately lost feeling in my hands. Next to me was this crazy woman. My hope of escape was fading fast, but I thought maybe, just maybe, I could talk to her, and she'd take pity on me. "Auntie?" I turned to her in a trembling voice. She shot me a stern look, but after a pause, she responded, "What do you want?" "Let me go," I pleaded, instantly regretting how ridiculous it sounded. She let out a laugh, then grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it into my face. "Oh, of course I'll let you go, sure! Straight to the next world!" She cackled, her voice filled with madness. Her last words made it clear. I wasn't getting out of here alive. At best, someone would eventually find my body and bury me with my parents. But there was an even greater chance that I'd be left to rot here forever. As I sat there, bound and helpless, I watched the old woman. She paced back and forth rapidly at times, then froze without warning, standing motionless for minutes. Occasionally, she mumbled something to herself, and a few times she burst into fits of laughter. Not the quiet kind of laugh either. This was full-on maniacal laughter, and for no apparent reason. While I waited for whatever was going to happen next, I noticed others approaching. Slowly, they began to gather around. There were about 10 of them, and they all looked alike, like they were related. I didn't even want to think about why they were all here. "Oh look, new among us!" One girl giggled, pointing at me. "No, not one of ours," another one replied. This grotesque group of monsters circled me, inspecting me like I was some kind of exhibit in a museum. The way they looked at me made my skin crawl, and my fear only deepened. But why was I dragged to this cursed island? Why couldn't I have gone somewhere else? Why did I decide to walk alone? The more I thought about it, the worse I felt. Tears began to fall uncontrollably from my eyes. I didn't bother to hide my face or turn away from the crowd of monsters. It wasn't like there was any hope they'd let me go. But maybe, just maybe, my tears would soften them. Their reaction stunned me. The crowd actually cheered my tears as if they found it funny. "Look, the little one is crying!" one of them shouted. The others turned their eyes on me and burst out laughing, not just giggles or chuckles, but full-throated laughter, as if I were a clown performing for them. Then, as if on cue, the laughter stopped. All at once, their mouths closed, and they stared at a single point. I slowly turned my head to see what they were looking at, and there, dragged along the ground, were the bodies of my parents. "Is the boy still here?" asked the one who had dragged me earlier. "Here!" the woman who threw dirt at me replied. "Good, let's begin," he said, dumping the corpses of my parents right in front of me. Their skin was pale, drained of life. They lay just a step away from me, but my mind refused to accept it. This had to be some kind of sick prank, an awful, twisted prank. The killer crouched down in front of me, so close I could smell the stench of his breath. "Do you like what you see?" he asked. I shook my head, horrified. "Well, I don't like it either. I grew up here, and here I will die. When my mother gave birth to me, she sent me here. There are many of us on this island. We have families too, but we can't work, and we can't go into the city. People are cruel." "They're not cruel," I protested despite my fear. "If you go to the city, no one will harm you." My words sparked a furious uproar among them. "Shut up!" he screamed. "People are cruel. Why else would they have sent us here? I never met my mother or father, and you came here with yours." His voice was seething with anger. "Yes!" came the old woman's screechy voice again. "You said he should be punished!" Without another word, the man pulled a rusty knife from behind his belt. I screamed, expecting the worst, and tried to squirm away. But to my shock, he didn't use the knife on me. He cut the ropes that bound me. My limbs were so stiff that I lost my balance and fell, prompting another round of cruel laughter. Before I could recover, the man came up and kicked me hard in the stomach. "Sit!" he barked. I sat by the tree, trembling as they gathered around my parents' bodies. They stripped them, turning out their pockets, and left them lying there, exposed. "What are you doing?" I screamed, but no one even looked at me. They were completely focused on what they were doing. One of them pulled out an axe from a bag. Two others dragged my parents' bodies onto a filthy, blood-stained oilcloth. With one powerful swing, an arm was severed. They hacked my parents' bodies apart like they were butchering animals, turning them into something grotesque. I watched, unable to move, tears streaming down my face, not sobbing anymore, just crying, utterly broken. My mind refused to process what was happening. I didn't know if this was real or if I was trapped in some awful nightmare. Finally, my body couldn't take it anymore. I blacked out. But it wasn't for long. They splashed water on my face, jolting me back to consciousness. They wanted me to keep watching the horror, to witness every second of the torture they inflicted on my parents. "Come on, pull the guts out," one of them commanded. Another one, standing over my father's body, reached into a filthy, torn bag and pulled out a pair of huge, rusty scissors, ones that looked like they were meant for sewing. Without hesitation, the bastard made a swift incision in my father's lower abdomen, dragging the blade up to his chest, splitting the pale skin and twisting the insides. Thankfully, I couldn't see the full horror of what they were doing. The group surrounded Dad, blocking most of my view. I often looked away, trying not to look at it. I tried to look away, to avoid seeing it, but every now and then I'd glance back and my stomach would churn. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of them shoving a plastic bottle into Dad's bloated stomach. Do they also flow blood? The brutality that followed was so obscene it felt unreal. They weren't satisfied with just that. It wasn't enough. They hacked off my parents' heads with an axe and mounted them on wooden stakes. I sat there numb, trapped in a living nightmare. Not even the darkest, most twisted films I'd seen had shown anything like this. My mind felt like it was slipping. This couldn't be real. Who could think of something so vile? My body weakened and waves of nausea rose in my throat. Everything felt distant, like I was floating outside my own body. But soon, a wave of panic hit me, so strong that it overwhelmed everything else. The man who had dragged me here earlier was walking toward me, a blood bottle in his hand. "Drink," he ordered in a single word. Instinct took over. I jumped up, fists swinging, but it was futile. He easily dodged, and before I could react, several of his comrades rushed in. They grabbed me, forcing me to the ground. I fought back, but I was no match for them. They pinned me down, and one of them gripped my chin tightly. I knew what was coming. I clenched my jaws as hard as I could, trying to keep my mouth shut. But then a sudden blow to my chest knocked the wind out of me and my mouth flew open involuntarily. They poured the bottle's contents into my throat, my father's blood. The taste hit me immediately. I gagged, a reflex that I couldn't control as the bile rose in my throat. I spat out as much as I could, but some of it made its way into my stomach. The nausea was immediate. I doubled over and vomited, my whole body convulsing. It was a violent, disgusting purge, and I couldn't stop trembling. At that moment, I wanted nothing more than to die. I didn't care about escaping. I didn't even care about revenge. I just wanted it to end. Death, though painful for a moment, would bring eternal peace. My body would rot, worms would eat my flesh, and my soul would finally be free from this horror. Above me, the sky stretched out, bright blue and endless. I stared at it, letting it consume me, until black spots began to dance before my eyes. Those spots grew larger and larger until they swallowed the blue entirely. Darkness overtook me. A sudden sharp pain shot through my arm, pulling me back to consciousness. The darkness faded. And when I opened my eyes, I was staring at the inside of a beige tent. I blinked, examined it, and gradually came to my senses. Sleeping bag, tent, my phone, and the whole. It was a dream. Just a bad dream. From the realization of what was happening, I laughed out loud, shaking my sore hand. Could this have all just been a nightmare? I reached a little more in the bedroom, and then still decided to leave the tent, because I wanted more than just lying. I unzipped the entrance and climbed out, calling, "Mom! Dad! Do we have—" But I didn't finish the sentence. The fire wasn't lit. The pot was overturned. Dishes were scattered around the campsite. But that wasn't the worst of it. Not even close. Mom lay face down in the dirt. Her left arm was outstretched in front of her, the other at her side, and her legs splayed awkwardly. Dad sat in a camping chair, his head twisted back at an unnatural angle. I froze. My body went numb as I stared at their lifeless forms. I didn't move, didn't breathe, until I heard the rustle of leaves behind me. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sound. A thin, tall man with a disproportionately large head was walking toward me.